I want you to think about the worst decision you've ever made. Got it? Now tell me, how long did you actually think about it before you pulled the trigger? If you're being honest, seconds, maybe less. The thing that cost you the relationship, the opportunity, the years of cleanup. It didn't start with a bad plan, it started with a missing pause. A 2025 study from Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews just changed how researchers understand impulse control. They found is that the part of your brain responsible for pausing doesn't just stop you from acting, it actually builds a picture of what's at stake before you commit. Here's what's wild. That maps almost perfectly onto a framework that's been sitting in the Bhagavad Gita for 3,000 years. I am Suraj. I connect neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy to find ideas that actually help you grow. And I pull from everything, from modern brain research to wisdom literature that's been around for thousands of years. And the pause is one of the most powerful tools I found at the intersection of all of it. Here's what I've come to understand. A pause is probably the most misunderstood concept in decision making. People hear pause and think slow, think hesitation, think weakness. But what I'm about to break down is the exact opposite. A pause doesn't slow you down, it cleans your act up. And the most decorated warrior in ancient history, a man trained for combat since childhood, standing on a battlefield with millions of soldiers, used this exact tool before the most important battle ever fought. Not because he was scared, because he was intelligent. Today, I want to show you what that pause actually is, why it works on a neurological level, and how to train it, starting today. So the next time the impulse hits, you don't just react, you respond. And by the end of this, I'll give you a 3-question system you can run in your head in under 10 seconds that changes how you show up in every conversation, every conflict, and every decision that matters. Let me start by killing a misconception. Because the moment I say, take a pause before you act, I know what some of you are thinking. I don't have time for that. I need to be fast. And look, I'm not here to tell you to slow down. A pause can take a split second or a day. The length depends on the situation. And it's your job, your skill, to make that judgment. But here's what a pause is. It's you giving yourself room to think clearly before you commit to something. That's it. Room to think. You're not doing nothing. You're running a pre-action check before you spend your energy. Without a pause, you have a reaction. With a pause, you have a response. A reaction is automatic. Your nerve sense is firing, your emotions commanding your body before your brain catches up. A response is chosen, filtered through clarity, through values, through an understanding of what's actually at stake. And I can say this because I've lived the opposite. I've made impulsive purchases, clothes, gadgets, things that felt urgent in the moment. I need this right now. And weeks later, they are sitting in my closet, still in the packaging, never used. And it's not just wasted money, it's the guilt that sits with you. The cleanup that takes months. The quiet realization that I wasn't buying because I needed something. I was buying because I skipped the pause. That's a small example, but the pattern is same whether it's a purchase, a text, or a life decision. When you act without clarity, you produce a misaligned outcome. You do something that doesn't match who you actually are, and that's where the real damage lives. The Gita called this seeing before acting. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, writing from a military camp, called it examining every impression before you act on it. Modern neuroscience calls it response inhibition. Different names, different centuries, same tool. Create a gap between the impulse and the action. That gap is the pause. Now, let me show you what happens when that gap doesn't exist. You've gotten the text, the one that hits wrong, and before you've even finished reading it, your thumbs are already typing. Not a response, a reaction. You send it, and 2 hours later, you're staring at the ceiling wondering why you said that. Or you're in a conversation, and someone says the thing that hits a nerve, and the words are already out of your mouth before you've decided whether you actually meant them. Not because you're a bad person, because the impulse arrived and the action followed, with nothing in between. That's the thing about impulsive action. It feels like freedom. You're reacting, you're moving, you're doing something. It feels powerful in the moment, but you're actually constructing a tangle. a situation that's harder to get out than the discomfort you were trying to escape. The short-term win becomes a long-term cage, and it happens so gradually that by the time you realize it, you're deep inside it. Here's what's actually happening under the surface when you skip that pause. Your amygdala, the brain's threat and reward detection system, fires in milliseconds. Now, for a long time, scientists thought that the prefrontal cortex was basically a brake pedal. It just stopped you from doing impulsive things. But the study that I mentioned earlier found something deeper. The prefrontal cortex doesn't just brake, it actually constructs the value of future outcomes, meaning the pause isn't just stopping you from doing something stupid. It's the moment your brain builds a picture of what's actually at stake. It's where you see consequence before they happen. No pause, no lens, no picture of the future, just the amygdala screaming, act now, and you obeying. And when you act without that lens, when you skip the pause and the consequences land, something worse follows. Shame arrives, guilt arrives. You look at what you said or did and think, that wasn't me. That doesn't represent who I actually am. And you're right, it doesn't. Because when you act in the heat of the moment by giving into the impulse of anger or envy or greed for short-term fulfillment, that action is toxic to your true identity. It's not the real you making the decision, it's the version of you that exists when the pause is missing. Let me take you back 3,000 years. The Mahabharata, one of the greatest epic ever told. Two branches of the same family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, have exhausted every negotiation, every compromise, every attempt at peace. War is now inevitable. The armies are assembled, millions of soldiers, elephants, chariots, archers. The battlefield of Kurukshetra stretches to the horizon, and Arjun, the greatest warrior alive, turns to his charioteer, Krishna, and says, "Take me to the middle, between the two armies. I want to see who I'm fighting." Think about what's happening here. This is a man trained for war since childhood. His entire identity is warrior. Everyone around him, his brothers, his allies, his commanders, they're ready to charge. The conch shells have been blown. The drums are beating. Every instinct, every norm, every expectation says, fight. And Arjun says, not yet. Show me what I'm about to do first. Not because he's afraid, not because he's hesitating, because he understands something that most people learn too late. You don't go to war without knowing what the war is for. Arjun wants to analyze what's at stake, who he's fighting for and against. Before the first arrow, before the first casualty, he creates a pause, not to avoid action, but to earn the right to act. And what happens in that pause? He sees his teachers, his uncles, his cousins, people he grew up with. The weight of what he's about to do lands on him, not as fear, but as responsibility. The Gita makes a razor-thin distinction. See clearly, then act fully. Don't skip seeing and just swing. Don't see and then crumble. See and then move with everything you've got. Because the purpose of the pause is not inaction. It's action with clarity and conviction. An action you can back up with all your might because it was calculated, not rushed. It was chosen, not triggered. And here's the deepest part. The pause doesn't choose whether to act. It chooses how to act. And how you act, how you speak, how you respond, how you show up in the moment that matters, that defines who you are. When you act with clarity and conviction, you're being authentically yourself. You're showing up as the person you actually are, not the version that exists when the alarm's going off and the amygdala is driving. The pause is where you find the balance between your emotional self and your logical, rational self. It's the gap where you observe your actions' future consequences before they become your reality. Now here's what most people miss. The pause isn't just beneficial to you and your inner self. It has a ripple effect on every situation, every conversation, every relationship you're in. Let me show you. Scenario A. Someone says something that hits a nerve. You react impulsively. You snap back. Voice raised. Words chosen for damage, not for truth. Now, what's the likelihood of that situation de-escalating? Close to zero. Because the person on the other end doesn't hear your point. They hear your energy. And your impulsive reaction becomes the precursor to their impulsive reaction. They match you. They escalate. And now you're in a feedback loop. Reaction feeding reaction. Emotion amplifying emotion. and within minutes, you're somewhere neither of you intended to be. Things get said that can't be unsaid. Trust gets cracked that can't be uncracked. And sometimes, especially with the people closer to you, it goes beyond repair. Not because the original issue is that serious, but because there was no pauses, no breaks, just two people driven by impulsive emotions with no ability to stop. A car with no brakes doesn't just crash the driver, it crashes the passenger too. Now, scenario B. Same trigger, same nerve hit, but this time you pause, even for a breath, even for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, you do something radical. You choose your response. Instead of being chosen by your reaction, you speak with composure, with clarity, not cold, not emotionless, but oriented. You say what you mean instead of saying what the anger wants you to say. And look what happens. You're not giving power to the other person by giving into the triggers they set, consciously or not. You're retaining power within yourself by staying in control. The situation doesn't escalate because you didn't hand them the fuel. With a loved one, a partner, a parent, a friend, this matters even more. Because when you act without clarity, you say and do things you don't truly mean, things that don't truly represent who you actually are to them. And those words land, they amplify. The other person reacts to the version of you that showed up without a pause, and the victim cycle spins. Action, reaction, escalation until something breaks. A pause with a loved one isn't just strategy, it's respect. It's saying, you matter enough for me to show up as my real self right now, not my reactive self. Alright, so how do you actually build this? Because everything I've just said means nothing if you can't execute it when the moment hits. Your heart will get distracted at numerous occasions. Pull it back, using breath, using a focal point, using practice. So here is the system. I call it the 3-question pause. It's designed for the moment the impulse rises, the anger, the desperation, the need to do something right now, and it gives you a framework to interrupt this chain before it runs. Question 1. What are the stakes? This is Arjun's first move. Before he asked, what should I do? He asked, what's actually on the line here? Most of our impulsive reactions treat a level 2 situation like a level 9. Someone disrespects you online, level 2. And you respond like your entire identity is under siege. Level 9. This stakes question recalibrates how you think. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much will this matter in a week, a year, 10 years? If it's below a 5, you probably don't even need to respond right now. If it's above a 7, you definitely don't need to respond right now. Because high stakes demand more pause, not less. Question 2. What is my duty here? Not my desire. This is the Karma Yoga filter. You have a right to work, but you're not the rightful recipient of the result. Never assume you're the cause of the outcome, but also never stop working. Your desire in the moment might be to fire back, to defend your ego, to prove you're right, but your duty, what the situation actually requires of you, that's almost always quieter. A father's duty in an argument with his teenager isn't to win, it's to keep the relationship intact. A leader's duty when the team member fails isn't to punish, it's to develop. Your duty is the thing that you'd be proud of tomorrow morning, and your desire is the thing that feels good right now. The pause separates the two. Question 3. What am I serving? Ego or purpose? This is the deepest cut, because most impulsive actions serve one thing: ego. The need to be right, the need to feel powerful, the need to not look weak. The Gita calls lust, greed, and anger the 3 doors to self-destruction. And ego is the fuel behind all 3. So you ask, if I act right now, who benefits? Is this serving my purpose or just feeding the part of me that wants a short-term win? If the answer is ego, that's your signal. That pause has done its job. You've seen clearly, now you choose whether to step forward or step back, from clarity, not from impulse. And I want to be clear, this doesn't mean you never act fast. Sometimes the stakes are clear, the duty is obvious, and the right thing to do is move immediately. The pause can be a split second. It can be a single breath. Arjun eventually fought. He fought with everything he had, but he fought with clarity, not with rage. He backed his action with his full might because it was calculated, not rushed. One more piece before we close. Because the 3-question pause is for the big moments, but you train it in the small ones. So the daily anchor is simple. Before your first decision of the day, before you check your phone, before you open email, take 60 seconds, 3 breaths, and ask yourself, What is my duty today? Not your to-do list, your duty. The one thing that if you did it well would make the day count. Start there. Build the muscle. Gradually, the pause becomes faster, sharper, more automatic, until it's not something you do. It's something you are. Let me take you back to where we started. The worst decisions you've ever made, the thing that cost you, the relationship, the opportunity, the peace you were building. What if, right before you pulled the trigger, you'd had 3 seconds? 3 seconds where your brain didn't just react, but actually saw the stakes, saw your duty, saw what you were really serving, saw the version of yourself you wanted to be in that moment. Ask yourself, would you have done it? The pause is not a media pause, where everything goes still and the world stops. Mastering a pause before action is giving yourself room to think clearly before making a choice that aligns with your values. You're not doing nothing. You're doing the most important thing. You're choosing how to act instead of letting the moment choose for you. And how you act defines who you are. Arjun didn't win the war by fighting first. He won by seeing first. He pulled his chariot into the middle of the chaos and said, "Show me what I'm about to do. Show me what it costs. Show me what it's for." And then he fought with everything. Not because the pause made him weaker, but because the pause made his action cleaner.